Hello everyone, today we are going to continue our French Revolution chapter, and today we are going to study the part 5. So as you can see in this picture, this is one slave and this is an Englishman who is treating the slave very badly. So by seeing this picture, I think you had got an idea that today we are going to talk about slavery. So let us first look at the situation of slave during the 17th century. Most revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobin regime was abolition of slavery in the French colonies. So one of the most important demand of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. So colonies in Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Domingo were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. These countries were the main suppliers of these things in the whole world. So uh, reluctance means the denying of the Europeans to work in distant and unfamiliar lands led to the shortage of labor on plantations. Now the Europeans said that we will not work in distant and unfamiliar land which is not familiar to them, and which is not in Europe. So this led to the shortage of labor on the plantation. So this was met. So this shortage of labor was fulfilled by a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and America. Slave trade began in 17th century. Now, how did this slave trade work? The French merchants sailed from Bordeaux to African coast and bought slaves from local chieftains who were there in the African coast. Now, the slaves were packed tightly into ships for 3 months, a long voyage across the Atlantic and Caribbean. So they were when the French merchants bought the slaves from the local chieftains. They packed these slaves tightly in the ships, such as we pack goods. So they treated the slaves very badly. As you can see here, they packed them. They were, they were filled with the ship was filled with them, and they in that situation they traveled for 3 to 4 months long voyage across the Atlantic to Caribbean and sold to plantation, and then the French merchants bought them to the France, and then sold to the local plantation owners. Exploitation of slave laborers met growing demand in European for sugar, coffee, and indigo. Now the plantation was improved in Europe, so there was a growing demand of sugar, coffee, and indigo in Europe. Now, this we discuss situation of slave in 17th century. Now we come to 18th century. What was the situation of slave in the 18th century? In the 18th century, little criticism of slavery in France. So in France, when people saw the situation of slave, there was a little criticism against the government that this is not good. So there was a little, not much, a little criticism in the France. National Assembly held debates. They held debates about the right of people. Should they do this exploitation of people, slaves like this? So National Assembly held debates on this topic, whether the rights of men should be extended to all French subjects, including those in the colonies, but did not pass any laws. They only did held debates, but they did not pass any laws related to this slave, fearing opposition from businessmen whose income depended on the slave. So the government was in a fear that the businessmen will oppose the government, because the businessmen earned their income from the slave trade only. Some of the businessmen, so their main business was this slave trade. So the government had a fear of these businessmen. But it was finally the convention which in 1794 legislated to free all slaves in French. In 1794, convention made laws to free all the slaves in France, but this was temporary. 10 years later, when Napoleon reintroduced slavery. So when Napoleon came to France, he reintroduced the slavery. But after Napoleon also finally finally slavery was abolished in French colonies in 1848. So in 1848 there was a total ban on the slave trade, and there was, after 1848, there was no slave trade allowed. So this was a short lesson. This was fifth part of the French Revolution. So we have left with only one, the last part, sixth. Okay, thank you.